Hi, this is Kevin, and today I'd like to talk about 5 tips to good system design decisions. With these 5 simple tips, even without a lot of technical knowledge, you'll find yourself making good system design decisions like a boss. Let's take a look.
The first thing is to keep similar things together.
Simple, right? I mean, you learned this in elementary school, about the same time you were learning how to spell. Similar things go together. Yet, you'd be surprised how many people with many years of experience forget this concept. Let's take a look at some examples.
You have a system. That system has a job, but the dates and times on when and what the job should run are stored on a different server. So if the business folks decide to change the dates the job runs, then we have to go to a completely different server to make this change. Instead, the server itself should keep track of when it should run the job. The decision on who runs the job and the actual job itself are similar and related, and thus should be kept together. Another example occurs in documentation and code. Sometimes people put code in one place and the documentation and information about it in a totally separate location. Don't do that. Put them together, because they are closely related and they belong together. If one changes, then the other changes as well. So they should be together. Avoid vendor lock-in.
Here's another example. Does your software system rely on one key piece of technology that has no alternative? If so, congratulations, you have vendor lock-in. Avoid it. This is a problem unless your organization has a budget of $1 billion or more, where you can just buy the vendor if you wanted to. Let me show you some examples.
A common example of vendor lock-in happened with the internet browsers many years ago. A long time ago, a browser called Internet Explorer 6.0 was widespread. Everyone used it. All websites had it as their default. That is until the browsers Firefox and eventually Google Chrome came along. All of a sudden, people were scrambling to get their websites that only targeted Internet Explorer to play nice in these other browsers. Another example. Say you have an HR system that tracks how much vacation time a person has. That system queries Microsoft's temporal tables for data. Now, do other database vendors out there have temporal tables? No. Can temporal tables be restored or replicated? Not as of this recording. So, there are a whole host of problems, and you can't switch out of it. Now, if Microsoft decides to get rid of temporal tables one day, your system is toast. To address this, try to select vendors or products that follow open source or common standards, like W3C or NIST standards. Believe it or not, there are whole organizations built and supported so that companies don't go off on their own. This helps make systems more interoperable. Avoid applying a one-size-fits-all approach.
It has been called many things. If your only tool is a hammer, then everything is a nail. Or, we did this here, so we should, for the sake of consistency, do the same thing there. Sound familiar? That's what people say when they blindly apply a one-size-fits-all approach, without checking to see if it's the right thing to do. Let's take a look at some examples.
You've been writing apps that follow the same pattern. Presentation layer, service layer, data layer. Presentation layer, service layer, data layer. However, now your customers demand better usability in the UI. They want it snappier, easier to understand, and it doesn't contain a lot of business logic in the servers. If you continue to use presentation, service, data layer, your presentation layer would get more and more bloated. Is there a way out? Yes, you might want to consider using a client-side application in the front end that talks to a controller or an API in the server. Here's another example. Someone gives a talk from a famous company like Facebook or Google and says, "Hey, look, we did this." So you rush back to your workplace and try to implement. It happens all the time. You need to remember that your organization is different. The culture is different. Everything is different. So what works for Google or Microsoft might not work for your organization. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try out what they're saying. I'm saying that you shouldn't just blindly copy what they're doing. Avoid magic. Basically, this means to avoid unknowns or surprises.
What I mean by magic is a series of unknown steps or setups in order to get something to work. We don't know why it works or how it works. However, we know that if we perform these steps in this order, it will work. It's likely not transferable to other systems. Let's take a look at some examples.
One example is config files. You can typically find a lot of magic in config files. So, for example, say your config file has a mysterious line in it that is obsolete, and your system breaks after a server upgrade. But you didn't know it was obsolete, and so you spent hours and hours trying to figure out what's going on. The fix turns out to be to add yet another mysterious line in the config file. Frustrating, isn't it? Try to avoid magic. Try to simplify your systems as much as you can. Another example is software that relies on certain steps in certain orders, or a series of codes that work only when they're in a certain sequence. Make decisions based on facts.
You'd be surprised how a lot of people make technical decisions based on their gut instinct. Or they just prefer long debates and discussions. Or they just guess. Try to avoid these. Try to make decisions based on facts, metrics, and hard data.
An example is buying or building a piece of software with a ton of features without asking, is this feature important? Is this needed? Did the customer say they wanted to interact with our applications in virtual reality? Typically this happens because engineers over-engineer something, when that something that they're anticipating or over-engineering is not really needed at all.
Well, those are the 5 tips that I have to make good system design decisions. Now these are just guidelines, not hard and fast rules, so there might be some exceptions. I hope this has been helpful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.